Hi, Oklahoma. Steve Russell wishing you a happy Veterans Day. Why do we celebrate Veterans Day? Well, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, you had the armistice that ended the First World War. It was an imperfect peace to a very bloody war, but the day was set aside to really remember the fallen from one of the most terrible wars that the world had ever had, and the most destructive up to that time. It was certainly one of the most casualty-producing wars that the United States had ever been in. Most of our casualties happening from May until November of just that year in 1918. In fact, when you look at the casualty rates in World War I, in just a 6-month period, they were double the casualty rates that we would have had in the same period in World War II. I've had a number of relatives in my family that served in World War I, knew a couple of them. And I had the privilege to know a great many World War I veterans in the course of my lifetime. Armistice Day, as it was called, was set aside until ultimately they decided to create Veterans Day for an official national recognition. Here we are in the centenary of World War I, the centenary celebrations of the remembrance of World War I for the sacrifices that are made. And while it's important that we remember veterans and thank them for their service, I think in some ways we ought to reflect and take time to remember those that lost their lives in World War I, or that sacrificed so much, or the impacts that came out of World War I, disease, famine, the influenza epidemic, which took thousands upon thousands of American lives here at home. These were terrible times. And while we may seem far removed from them today, here it is 100 years later, it wasn't that long ago. In fact, Frank Buckles, an Oklahoman, died in 2012, the last World War I veteran alive in the United States. That was only 5 years ago. So take time to reflect to those that lost their lives in World War I. Take the time to reflect on the tragedy of that, but also to celebrate some good things that came out of our experiences as we reflect on those that served their country, as we embody it today in Veterans Day. What are we talking about? It may be strange to know that in World War I, 3 out of 5 of the doughboys that went to France to fight for the United States were either not born in the United States or their parents were not born in the United States. 60% of the doughboys that fought for America were immigrants. That's worth noting. As we get into discussions about all of those things with immigration policy and the like, we ought to remember that America has always been out of many one. We don't need to focus on the things that divide us. Rather, we need to focus on those that were willing to sacrifice their own lives, even if they came from somewhere else, for the ideals that America holds, for our constitutional protections, for the inalienable rights that we have as embodied in the Bill of Rights that was attached to our Constitution when it was created. These are the things worth remembering. And that's what all that have worn the uniform stand for. They took an oath to support and defend that Constitution, to stand for those liberties. Some were born here, some were naturalized citizens, others were not even citizens yet, but gained their citizenship through right of service. This is the tradition of the veteran, and for that we say thank you to all of our veterans that have served in the United States military. Without you, our freedoms would not be what we enjoy today. The oft-stated freedom isn't free is true, but I would like to challenge you to reflect a little bit. Watch a documentary or crack a book or look at old newspaper articles or something from the sacrifices that Americans made 100 years ago and how it changed our world, how it changed our country, our experiences in that war, and take time to reflect on that as we also thank our veterans. Cindy and I wish you a very happy Veterans Day, and I hope you will enjoy it as we all reflect on the greatest country, the freest people, and the greatest privilege that it is to be an American. Happy Veterans Day.